The Cuyahoga County Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, February 11th, 2025 is called to order at 2:06, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Good afternoon, everyone. As a reminder to all in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll, Mr. Sweeney.
Present.
Mr. Castleberry.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schlepper.
Here.
Ms. Conwell. Ms. Conwell's absent at the moment. Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Turner.
Here.
Mr. Hauser's absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Council President Miller.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Item number 3 is public comment. Has anybody signed in?
No public comment has been received.
Thank you very much. We will move on to item 4, which is discussion. I would like to briefly discuss the parliamentary process for handling amendments and substitutes because it comes up so frequently. This is primarily for our new members, but the review is good for everyone. Amendments and substitutes are the two ways that we revise pending legislation. They are similar, except that an amendment simply strikes language to be deleted and adds new language, while a substitute replaces the whole piece of legislation with a revised version. By our council rules, we should consider an amendment or substitute after the motion to adopt or refer comes first. The legislation is read into the record by the clerk. Before any revision is considered, a motion is made to refer the legislation to the full council or to adopt in council, making that the main question under consideration. Then a motion to amend or substitute is offered and voted upon. If a motion to amend or substitute is approved, then the main motion to refer or adopt is still pending, but the version pending now reflects the revision that was approved. Since a motion to refer or adopt has already been made, a motion to refer or adopt as substituted is not needed. All that is needed is when ready to vote on the question of whether to refer or adopt the revised version. By practice, we have also handled amendments and substitutes in a second fashion. Once a resolution or ordinance is read into the record, it is before the council or committee for consideration. It may then be amended or substituted by motion to do so. If the amendment or substitute is approved, the revised version is then before the council. However, it is not yet approved. We have merely changed the version that we are considering. We will then need further action to refer the legislation to council or to adopt it in council, and that could be at the same meeting or at another meeting. If we desire to refer the legislation to council or adopt it in council at that time, then a motion is made to refer or adopt as amended or substituted, followed by discussion, and then a vote on the motion will occur. Does anyone have any questions about the amending or substituting?
Can you repeat that, please? I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
Just kidding. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So,
Council President, let
Yes.
the record reflect that Ms. Conwell is in.
great. Thank you. Next on the agenda, I would like to open a discussion on the Community Development Fund, which is supported by casino tax revenue. Unlike economic development projects aimed at creating jobs, community development projects are typically placemaking projects aimed at creating recreational or cultural amenities, or projects aimed at creating or renovating community, or nonprofit facilities. Many of these projects have been funded with ARPA grants, but as this source is being used up, I expect more focus on the Community Development Fund. For the past several years, the casino revenue, which is currently averaging about $8.8 million per year, has been divided approximately equally between the Community Development Fund and the Economic Development Fund. The Community Development Fund spends $1.5 million per year for the $50,000 grants under the Community Development Supplemental Grant Program. We have also committed $1 million per year from the fund to the land bank for the county's housing program, but that commitment ends this calendar year. Finally, we may pay $1.4 million per year in gateway debt service from casino revenue funds before funds are transferred to economic development and community development, meaning that Community Development Fund would essentially pay for half of it. What remains in the Community Development Fund after these commitments is available for other projects. Based on the above, we could sustain a maximum of $2.5 million per year for other projects, and that assumes no money for housing after 2025 and that another source is found for the gateway debt. Our process for choosing projects in the past has not been well defined. I would like to move toward a well-defined process with formal applications and scoring rounds. However, my goal for the first half of 2025 is more modest. I'm simply asking if we can agree on two things. First, anyone interested in an allocation from the Community Development Fund will complete a brief application similar to the ARPA application, and Trevor will keep a file of applications. My purpose is to ensure that applications are not considered one at a time until the money runs out. Rather, decisions will be made with knowledge of what other requests have been received, so that decisions can be made about priorities. Second, allocations from the fund for the first half of 2025, I'm recommending we agree they not exceed $2 million. This is somewhat more than a sustainable number, but I believe that that is okay given that the fund has a balance of approximately $8 million. This recommendation is based on knowing that some excellent projects are ready to be funded now, but others will require time before they will be ready to be considered. My purpose is to have a good balance between funding projects that are ready now and maintaining capacity to fund excellent projects that will come a year or two down the road. So those are my comments, and at this point I would open it up to any of my colleagues for any questions, starting with Councilwoman Turner.
Thank you, President Miller. Just a point of clarification, because you said a lot. Can you repeat the total amount in the fund and what your expectation is in terms of how much we could spend?
So currently the fund has about $8 million, and we have hardwired commitments, $1.5 million for the supplemental grant program, and 1.0 million for the housing program. And then it's also been widely discussed but not officially acted upon that we might use the casino revenue before it's split into the two funds to cover the $1.4 million for the gateway debt service for the 20 million that we approved the end of last year. So, so that means that even if we were not putting money into housing and we were not funding Gateway, we would have a maximum annual sustainable amount of about 2.9 million. However, since we have a current balance of 8 million and for the last couple years, the funding has been relatively light. We could go a little bit more than the 2.9 million this year if there are projects that warrant our investment.
Thank you.
That's the summary.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Simon.
Mr. President, so you're not interested now in learning about what we have coming up in terms of a proposal? Is that something you want to hear now? Something I've been working on? Do you want to wait on that? And I appreciate it.
I am interested in that, and one thing that I would like to do. I'm aware of 5 or 6 projects right now. There's Birthing Beautiful Communities. There's the West Side Market. There's Cahoon Park and Bay Village, and there's a few more. So one thing that I want to do is just ask everybody who's interested to fill out this brief application so that we know what's out there, that we know what the pipeline is, and if there's additional things that people are interested in, you know, I would like to see them come forward.
Yeah, I'll be submitting this. I think you're aware of a project I've been developing. Vice Chair knows. This is a workforce invest in children project to enhance our workforce childcare as a pilot. And that will be something I'll be proposing with detail about how we can join workforce development as well as pre-K education with childcare workers. So that's what you'll be seeing from me.
Through the chair, if I may follow up on the councilwoman's point.
Yes.
You mentioned, so thank you for sharing what your project might be or will be. You mentioned Birthing Beautiful Communities, West Side Market, and Cahoon Park. Do they have sponsors? Can you tell us who? Possibly sponsor, but whose projects are those? Is that?
I know that Cahoon Park is in Councilman Kelly's district. I think Cleveland Public Theater is in Councilman Sweeney's district. I'm not sure about. Is it Conwell's district? Yes. And
The market?
In Councilman Jones's district, we have the YMCA project, which is being developed. There's also a project in my district regarding the Studio West LGBTQ Center, but that project is not ready to go at this time. It's on the horizon, but I don't know when that would come forward. So
Last point of clarification, the West Side Market?
West Side Market.
Conwell. Oh, okay. Thank you, sir.
I think that'll be up to the administration if, when they come back next year or whatever, for the funds.
Okay.
Council gave.
We think the West Side Market is going to come back for additional money, but certainly not till the second half of this year and maybe into next year. We don't know the timing, but it's down the road. It's on our radar screen. Any other comment?
Mr. President?
Yes.
Just when a decision is made, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, we made a decision about allocating some dollars for this. Just let everybody know, or I'd like to know before it hits legislation, just to comment on it or just to understand it. Not to comment on it, just to understand what's coming. Does that make any sense?
I'm not totally clear because I
decision- yeah.
don't anticipate that, that final decisions are going to be made prior to legislation being introduced. I think.
Let me
I think-
rephrase it, can I?
Yes.
Mr. President, if a decision is made to introduce legislation, let everybody know before it's read into the record, is my thought.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
Mr. President,
Yes.
Legislation about this topic or this topic?
Because it's the Casino Funds Community Development, and I'd just like to be aware of it. I'll be supporting it, but I just want to be aware of it.
So this will come in some form of legislation at some point, Mr. President?
Each one does, don't it?
Well, I'm talking about this change of, this is just a policy that you're implementing. This won't be through a legislative process.
Not at this time. When if later on in the year or next year we move to a more formal process with scoring rounds, we might have some legislation that codifies it. But
And
it's-
Mr. President, who would be making decisions about the so we introduce legislation as you envision it, so this project I'm anticipating would come before council just like is CDSG, or how would this come? It would come in the form of legislation and council would decide. That, there's no scoring team, correct?
Not at this time. What I anticipate is that that council members would introduce legislation and almost always, since this is the Community Development Fund, the legislation would be referred to the Community Development Committee. And the committee would make a recommendation to the full council. And I just want to see two things happen. Number one, that the committee has access to all of the applications that have been filed so far, so that when they make the decisions in the context of knowing what the whole pipeline is. And the second thing is that we have some understanding of how much money is going to be spent at any one time, so that we don't spend all the money on the first projects that come in through the gate and don't have anything left farther down the road. Those are the only two things that I'm hoping informally to accomplish, to give us a little bit more defined process. But it would still go through the introduction of legislation. It would be heard in the Community Development Committee, which would then recommend to the full council.
Is there a way, Mr. President, that each council member would have an opportunity to use these funds for, just similar to what we did with the ARPA money? I mean, I hate to see somebody squeezed out, because whatever council situation's going on, I want to make sure that this money's used equitably and fairly like it's been in the past. And that's something I would want to make sure that our members have opportunity, and if one comes, and I think this is part of your goal. Can you let?
I think over time that needs and opportunities are going to arise in every council member's district, and I would urge the Community Development Committee to give some consideration to the history, to make sure that there's some equitability, but I don't think it would be a good thing if we make a a formal dividing up of the money by district. I think that raises a lot of questions that I would rather not get into.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that. I just wanted clarity, Mr. President. And we know that 2 projects just came through in the last couple months without a formal process. And so when do you think this formal process should begin?
So I think as far as the idea that we're going to have an application filled out by every applicant and that we're going to have some understanding of how much money we're going to spend at any one time, those things should begin immediately. As far as having a formal scoring round process, well, maybe in the second half of this year, if we as a body collectively agree that that's something that we want to do. Okay. Anything else?
One more point.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead. Please go right ahead.
Just around the point, President Miller, around equity, and I think the point that you raised about not distributing these funds the way we did with the ARPA funds, that might raise some questions. But if there is a project, for example, that goes through this pipeline, through that committee, that we all believe is of great benefit to the whole county, right, to the whole community, and I decide, with my vote, I would like to support that. But let's say we exhaust or reach our cap for that particular fiscal year where there may be no funds left for me to do a project in my district. Will there be any assurances that within the next funding cycle that, there might be some consideration to the council members that did not submit for projects?
So, whether that's done informally or formally, that's what I'm recommending. Because that's what I was referring to when I said that when the Community Development Committee reviews the application, that they should give some consideration to the history. In other words, what money went where in the past. So that's what I was referring to.
President?
Yes.
To the 5 projects that you mentioned earlier, how were you characterizing those 5 in terms of the process? Were they already were you considering those 5 projects already in the pipeline before you established the scoring criteria? Or help me understand where these 5 that you mentioned in particular fall in your process.
So my intention is that we're going to start by inviting each of the applicants to submit requests so that we'll have applications on file. And the second thing is that we're going to want to determine which projects are ready to go and need council support immediately. And I know that in the case of some of them, it's yes, and in the case of some of them, it's no. As I understand your YMCA project, I get the sense that it's, whether it's a month or a couple of months, but it's ready to go. And so I would, any project that has a sponsor and it's ready to go, and then I would encourage them to introduce legislation, and it would be considered in the Community Development Committee.
And you're correct. In deference to you, after our conversation, I did not introduce mine today. So I'm holding, I just want to understand how we're moving forward. If what I'm hearing, then in 2 weeks, I could introduce that legislation?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Conwell.
To the chair, you mentioned Councilman Kelly had a project, and what was,
Yes. Councilman Kelly.
First of all, I had a question. Who's the applicant going to be? Is it going to be the community that wants the project, or is it going to be the council person who is looking to help?
The applicant will be whoever we're assisting, whether it's the city of Brook Park or the city of Bay Village for Cahoon Park, or whether it's the Cleveland Public Theater or the West Side Market or the YMCA. I would presume that would be the applicant, but then I would presume that the application would be sponsored by the council person from the applicant's district.
Okay, now, Ms. Conwell, did you have a question about what the project would be?
he just
or-
mentioned it, Cahoon Park. I just wanted to know.
So it's the overall lakefront project that's down there. There would be everyone coming to that general area through their paths and the lakefront. But it's all by Cahoon Park there.
This project is part of the very large overall lakefront development plan that the executive and others brought forward, but not all of the projects immediately had funding sources, and so this project needs funding assistance to move forward. Ms. Simon.
Mr. President, I think the City of Cleveland Council members each get their own allocation of casino revenue dollars. Is that not true, if you know?
Cleveland City Council,
Yeah.
I think that's the case.
Okay, and so why wouldn't this council body consider such a thing, that each of us would have an opportunity to have a share of the dollars in that way? I'm just putting it out there. I don't know what the pushback or blowback would be with that. If we
So-
all, instead of the way that you're proposing, I think each of us have equal opportunity, should have equal opportunity to this, the revenue dollars.
So for one thing, we have much stronger language in our charter that says that no individual council member is to direct any of the county's money, where the city of Cleveland doesn't have anything like that in their charter.
Okay, and we know that's not the case with us, because with the other ARPA dollars, we had committee on that. So no one council member has ever done that. I don't want to belabor the conversation. I just want to raise it as a different option for council members to know that there's different ways to do that. I know you don't want to do it that way, but other council members should understand that that's another way to allocate these dollars.
That's fair. Councilman Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just on the City of Cleveland stuff, it's 15% for the council, 85% for the administration, just for clarification. And are you trying to use these funds for projects that are more county-drawn to or individual ward-based? Those ones you have been mentioning, YMCA has a county draw. West Side Market has a county draw. Calhoun Park has a county draw. Is that what you're trying to move towards? Or your concept?
Who are you talking to, the president?
Yeah, the president.
That's what I thought.
Oh, did I pretend like I was
so,
talking to you? My bad.
I think it's a very desirable thing when projects come forward that not only impact a particular neighborhood, but also have a county-wide draw. That's a good thing, but I don't expect that every project's going to be like that. And I think there can be some very, very good projects, but where the impact will be more localized. And I think we're going to see projects of both kinds come forward.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with me, Mr. President.
Okay, Ms. Conwell.
To the chair, just wondering if we could all get a list of the projects that we've had in the past that we've used. I'm sure staff has kept a list of those projects.
Yes, we have information like that available, and I would ask Trevor if he would distribute that to everybody. It's readily available.
And I think the City of Cleveland Council people get 25,000 if it comes down to that.
I'm just going with what I put together when I was council president. It might have changed, but when it came in, it was a understanding that the administration got 85 and 15. Let me clarify. That's what happened when it originally was put in. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. That was a good and helpful discussion. And so before we move on, while we're still in discussion, is there anything else that anybody would like to briefly discuss for the good of the council? Okay, hearing none, we're going to go to items referred to committee.
Council President,
And yes,
let the record reflect that Mr. Hauser is in attendance.
good, thank you very much. Ordinance number 2024-0005.
Ordinance 2024-0005, amending Chapter 501 of the Cuyahoga County Code.
So, thank you very much, and this is the next in a series of discussions on this legislation regarding the county's contracting processes. We heard this 2 weeks ago, and we went through the key items one by one and discussed them, and based on what I heard, we came up with a potential substitute version, which I know is a lot closer to the council's thinking on these issues. Whether it fully reflects our thinking and is ready to go, well, that remains to be seen. There's a good chance that that a few points will need some additional work. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have Mike go through item by item, and we're going to discuss the points one at a time, and he will present what's in the new substitutes. And when we're done with that, if we think the substitute is at least an approximation, we'll accept the substitute. If we think it's ready to go, which I think is probably unlikely, but if it is, we would then refer it to the full council for a second reading. But more likely, we will hold it for some further refinement, and I hope that probably at the next meeting, we might be ready to go. So with that, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Michael King, council staff. As the council president indicated, before you is a proposed substitute ordinance and an updated comparison table, which is similar to the one we went over a couple weeks ago. The rightmost column reflects what's in the proposed substitute with items highlighted to reflect the substantive changes. I've also highlighted a couple sections in the two middle columns just to note a couple of clarifications or corrections we made to the table that was distributed last time. Some of these were noted at the last meeting, others were brought to our attention from the administration. They're relatively minor in terms of substance, but happy to go through those as we go. Since we went through all of these items in detail at the last meeting, I'll try to keep the summary brief and mainly highlight the differences between the administration's proposal and the proposed substitute in front of you today, but I welcome any clarifying questions as we go. So with that, we'll dive in on the right column at the top of page 1 and work our way down. So the first item, again, is the general approval thresholds. Again, the administration's proposal would be that council approves transactions over 1.5 million. The proposed substitute changes this to transactions over 600,000. The Board of Control, under the administration's proposal, would approve transactions between 25,000 and 1.5 million. Under the proposed substitute, the BOC would approve transactions between $10,000 and $600,000. And then finally, under the administration's proposal, departments could spend up to $10,000 without specific approval from the Department of Purchasing. The proposed substitute would change this to be up to $2,000 without approval from the Department of Purchasing. And if you look at the current law, the proposed substitute is basically in between the status quo and the administration's proposal. I'll pause there if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll.
Okay, so before we continue, I would like to ask Director Porter if he has anything that he would like to present.
Mr. Chair, can I ask Mike one question first?
Sure.
Through the chair to Mr. King, how did we get to these proposed? Is that what Paul's going to speak on?
So I
yeah.
can answer that question. We listened very carefully to what we heard from all the council members, and on a lot of questions, there was a range of what was said, and we took a shot at coming up with a possible consensus solution, and what's here is only a suggestion for further discussion, and each of these items can be further amended, and that's what we're trying to determine this afternoon.
So the inflationary cost was what we have in front of us is,
So, actually, on the 600,000 number, if we did inflation, it hasn't been changed since 2011, and if we did inflation since 2011, it would actually be something around 700,000. But I heard some people say, let's do an inflationary increase, and I heard some people say, it's fine the way it is, let's just keep it at 500,000. So I kind of took half of an inflationary increase as the number to put in for this. So that's how we got the 600,000.
thank you.
Director.
Thanks, Council President Miller. And just before I answer the question about the threshold, I want to thank you and thank Mike and other council staff members and council members who have worked on this. And those of you that participated in the discussion at the last meeting, we appreciate the time and effort you put into looking at this overall package of legislation. I know it contains a lot of different elements. And just looking at everything that Mike is going to go over, we appreciate the proposed substitute in terms of kind of striking a balance between what we've requested and what council, based on the discussion at the last meeting and during the summer last year, seemed to be feeling. We do have a concern that that 600,000 top line number is a lot lower than what we were proposing. As you just noted, inflation would take it to a little bit over 700,000. We're proposing 1.5 million. Broadly speaking, we're good with the other numbers in terms of the bottom number for Board of Control approval and then increasing the spending authority that departments have before items have to come to the Department of Purchasing. If we wanted to strike a balance, right now we're at 500,000 for the maximum that Board of Control can approve. I would propose looking at a number maybe more like 1 million, which is half of the increase that we were suggesting to 1.5 million.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So, any other comments or questions regarding the general approval thresholds?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just in my opinion, if we're going to go through this exercise to make an improvement to this legislation, I feel like we should at least get to the inflationary, because if we go through all this and we're still giving them less spending power than they had in 2011, unless this council wasn't comfortable with that number to begin with, but if we were comfortable with the current number, I feel that we should at least get up to the inflationary number.
Okay. Any other comment? Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. We also have to remember that the Board of Controls is a creation of this council. We oversaw all dollars from 2011, every penny. So the creation of Board of Controls was certainly a benefit to us, so that we're not sitting here going through it all right now. So the idea of inflation being applied to our threshold of 500,000 to 600,000, it's not an inflationary matter in my estimation. It's our threshold of how much work we want to see and how much we don't want to see. I believe this proposed section should be returned back to current law, and 600 should be 500. Inflation relates to the $2,000. When the frontline workers are going to DIY and, $1,000 was fine at one day, and today it's not. $2,000, I certainly could support that. But the changing of our 500, of what we decide, what we want to look at, 500,000, I think we can bear the brunt of the work of looking at 500,000 or more. So I think it should be returned to the original dollar amount and reflect inflation in those frontline worker positions, like the $2,000.
Councilman Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, I just have one comment. I'm okay with this the way it was just drawn up. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Conwell?
To the chair, I agree with Councilman Jones. Health and Human Services Committee is actually, before we change amounts and things like that, are actually going through a process to look at our major contracts and to make sure and see, is it homeless population, So I would just like to say, keep it where it is now until maybe we finish our formal process of actually looking at all of our, I'm asking all of the directors for HHS to give all of their major contracts. So me and Levine will have an idea what the thresholds and what the amounts are.
So you're saying keep it at 500,000. Ms. Simon, did you have something?
Yeah, I think it's okay where it is, but I'm also okay with the substitute, this slight. I think the benefit, obviously, to raising it to the new thresholds that are proposed today would maybe speed things up for the contractors, maybe. And I'm not sure that that would really be the result of this. I'm not sure, because the delays have historically not had to do with the threshold for the new members. The delays had to do with the administration getting the checks out, going through that process. So the delay here isn't council, although on certain things we have 3 readings. So I'm ambivalent right now until I can maybe see that things have changed at the administration. I'm on the fence. I can see both sides.
Anything else? Councilman Gallagher?
Mr. President, the original was about 15 years ago, so the new, our new proposal really, I don't think is horrible. I just think the administration used the wrong highway to get here because it isn't, as Councilwoman Simon said, it really wasn't the processing, which could be better, but it wasn't on our side. So the new numbers, I think, are reasonable considering it's been 14, 15 years, so I'm good with it.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Yes, Councilman Hauser.
I just had a quick comment. As someone who sits on Board of Control, I just feel like I would be remiss if, I know the thoughtfulness that goes into Board of Control, the questions we ask beforehand, and all the thoughtfulness that goes into Board of Control as a whole. I'm also okay with the slight change from 500,000 to 600,000. But I do know that some things should come before the whole council as a whole. I think that's important as well.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on. I would just mention our target time to get to our executive session is around 3:30 or shortly thereafter. I don't have a need that we get through all of this before that time. It depends on how much discussion there is. We'll take as long as we need. If we don't finish it, we'll just break and continue at the next meeting. Real estate approval thresholds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Real estate approval thresholds. As a reminder, the current code treats real estate differently than most other transactions. Anything over $50,000 or for other than fair market value longer than 6 months has to come to council. Other transactions go to Board of Control from $5,000 to $50,000. The administration proposed basically making real estate transactions have the same threshold as all other transactions. So everything over 1.5 million would come to council. Everything below 1.5 million would go to Board of Control, and that includes transactions that are less than $5,000 or $2,000 or $1,000. So any real estate transaction would at least go to Board of Control for approval under the administration's proposal. The proposed substitute amends the administration's proposal to change that threshold from 1.5 million to 100,000. So it's sort of a hybrid approach, I think, between the status quo and the administration's proposal. It's still treating the threshold amount lower than the for real estate transactions, lower than all other transactions, but it is allowing for more transactions to be approved through the Board of Control process than status quo.
So just a little comment on this, that the one thing that I heard more than anything else at the last council meeting is that real estate is a special case and should be treated differently from everything else. And in the new proposal, that aspect is maintained in number one, that the threshold for council is much lower at 100,000 as opposed to 600,000, or if it ends up 500,000. And also that all real estate has to go through either the Board of Control or the council. There isn't anything that can be handled departmentally on real estate. Over the last 14 years, we had a number of contracts for like $1 usually for the Board of Developmental Disabilities or various nonprofit organizations, and none of them turned out to be controversial, and I do think those can go to the Board of Control, and that we don't need to have this more complicated language about longer than 6 months and other than fair market value. If it's 100,000 or less, it's Board of Control. If it's over 100,000, it's the full council, and that's what's being suggested, and Ms. Simon is first.
You know, I don't agree. I think the language about the 6 months is important because the county could enter into multi-year lease agreements that might not be suitable. I mean, we've had leases that I've seen in my practice up to 50 years, and at the end of the day, it's inequitable. So I think we do have to look at the transaction length and the months on the lease. I don't think that's irrelevant. And I'd like examples, and not today, of what kind of real estate transactions are we looking at below or up to 100? Are those lease agreements, and we take the total amount of the leasehold? How are we coming up with that? Are we buying parcels of property, selling small pieces? So I kind of want to look at historically what we've done within this range. I'm skeptical about giving a lot of latitude on real estate. I think it is different.
So, Director Porter, can you give us some enlightenment of the typical kinds of real estate transactions under $100,000 that we're likely to see?
Certainly. The example I would point to, you mentioned, some of the leases that the Board of Developmental Disabilities has done. In addition to that, there was a lease, I think, somewhere around 12 months or 18 months ago that was for the Cleveland Police Historical Society for underused or unused space in the Justice Center. that I think was $10 over the term of the lease, that had to come to council instead of going to Board of Control. And there are other low dollar amount items that I would point to. I think there's, essentially a server closet that we pay for some data storage in a building downtown. Items like that again, are they going to generate controversy? Do they rise to the level of meriting scrutiny at a council meeting? Or does it make better sense from a business perspective to send them to the Board of Control for review and approval? Those are examples that I would point to, and I'm happy to prepare a better list for you as well.
Thank you so much.
Certainly.
But I'm going to tell you, I'm not comfortable. These lease deals, short-term leases, the police department, Cleveland Police at the Justice Center, the historical, I think council needs to look at that and also see why in some instances it's a low amount of rent or lease payments. And we've always asked those questions and I've gotten solid answers, but this is a place where there can be potentially, and I'm not saying the administration would ever do this or anybody here, but a place for some horse trading to go on behind the scenes. And I think council needs to just look at these real estate transactions.
Other comments or questions on this section? Ms. Simon?
Just a comment. The Board of Developmental Disabilities, for example, in Public Works, it usually goes to Public Works Committee, has never had an issue with the timeline of us hearing or getting those out, so. Proposed is keeping it the same.
Anything else? Okay. General procurement thresholds.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you'll recall, this is about the threshold for when you go out to bid, how much, what are the thresholds for formal competitive procurement, informal competitive procurement, and then no form of formal procurement. And under current law, contracts or transactions over $50,000 generally have to go to formal competitive procurement. Between $5,000 and $50,000 is informal, and below $5,000, there's no competitive procurement requirement. It's a quote system. The administration's proposal would be to raise these thresholds for formal from 50 to 250, and from informal from 5,000 to 50,000 to 25 to 250. The proposed substitute in front of you today would revise down the administration's proposal for formal competitive procurement from 250 to 200, and for informal to 10,000 to 200,000.
Can I ask some
Yes.
clarification through the chair to Mr. King? For the informal, what was the administration's original proposal?
The informal would be for procurements between 25,000 and 250,000.
So my comment on this item is that the informal process is still quite strong, unlike in a lot of other jurisdictions, and gives us the opportunity to have a truly competitive process, but do it more quickly and do it without all the reams and reams of paperwork that's required for the full competitive bid process. And I do think that the informal competitive bidding will enable us to bring more bidders into the process, more small businesses, more minority businesses, and for that reason, I propose that we do support some significant increases on these threshold levels. So I now ask my colleagues for their comment on this section. No comment? Okay.
I was just trying to look at what in terms of how we got to the 200. What was the original? Where's the threshold originally?
Current current is formal competitive procurement is 50,000 or more, and informal is from 5,000 to 50,000. The proposed substitute would allow the informal competitive process up to 200,000 and would start the informal process at 10,000. So the place where the informal starts would go from 5,000 to 10,000, and the upper limit would go from 50,000 to 200,000.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. President, what is the current law on informal?
Current on the informal is it starts at 5,000 and goes up to 50,000. Okay, well, hearing no further comment, we're going to get into the weeds now on the exemptions from competitive procurement. To my colleagues, this was the most complex of the sections that we're dealing with, and kudos to Mike King. He spent a lot of time going through the 19 items, item by item, to come up with some recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate that. As a reminder, so we have the general procurement requirements and thresholds. These are the exemptions. So these are the things that the competitive process would not by default apply to. And it's a list of 19 items in the administration's proposal. Some of them, I think, make a lot of sense. Things like sole source contracts, emergency purchases, agreements with other governmental entities, including grants from the federal government. You wouldn't want to go through like a formal RFP or RFQ process for a lot of these types of things. But there were also items that were included, such as professional services, legal services, architectural services, consultants, engineering and design, as well as contracts for particular services provided by the county related to family services, criminal justice services, insurance policies, and other goods and services for people with disabilities. So we went through each of these items, and in the proposed substitute, it reduces the list of exemptions from 19 to 12. If you're interested in digging into the weeds on that, it's on pages 16 to 18 in the ordinance itself. Basically, there's a long list spanning those 3 pages, and you can see in track changes those items that are being deleted from that list. And we did speak to Director Porter in consultation to get a better sense of what items typically do go through a procurement process as a matter of practice versus those that don't. And so this would reduce the number of cases where by default there is no competitive procurement required. Now, one thing I do want to note, just as a reminder, is that on a case-by-case basis, any contract could be exempt from competitive procurement if an exemption is sought from the Board of Control. So if, for instance, there is a compelling reason for the county to hire outside legal counsel or an architect or an engineer without a competitive process, the county can still do that, but it will require an exemption to be approved by the Board of Control first. And so there is still some flexibility there. This really just deals with those items that by default don't make sense to go through a competitive procurement.
So, Michael, could you kind of run down the major examples of these are the cases where on informal bids that we require that the competitive process apply? And then what are the major examples of things that we don't think it's necessary and we agreed with the blanket exemptions?
Absolutely. So for the items that are being deleted from the exemptions, meaning that under the proposed substitute, there would be a formal process or a formal or informal process. A competitive process required by default would include things such as professional services, including architectural, legal, medical, veterinary, financial, insurance, IT, engineering, consulting, surveying, appraisal, brokerage, or construction management services, professional design services for architects. Let's see. insurance policies, healthcare plans, or childcare services for provision to county employees. And then certain purchases related to public children's services agencies, criminal justice services, and goods and services related to persons with severe disabilities. The items that would remain exempt from competitive procurement that in the proposed substitute include things such as emergency purchases, certain real estate transactions, purchases for things purchased at auction. So there is a competitive process, it's just not our competitive process. Single source purchases, agreements with the federal government or state or political subdivisions, alternative procurements or exemptions approved by the Board of Control, grants funded through the federal, state, or other grant programs where the county is a recipient, joint purchasing programs where we've entered into, for instance, like CCAO, we'll enter into joint purchasing programs where they will negotiate a competitive price and we'll purchase through them. And similarly, state term contracts where the state has negotiated a price with a particular vendor and we can purchase using their pricing power and bargaining power to get a more advantageous price. And then there's a number of categories that are included that are routine, that generally apply, like paying for specific news services, payments to landlords to avoid evictions, court arbitration costs, et cetera. But I would say the big ones are the sole source, joint purchases, agreements with other municipalities and governmental entities.
Questions or comments? Yes. Ms.
Just a
Simon.
brief question to Mike through the president and chair. So I'm looking at a different section. I'm looking at page 4, and I don't know if we should take this separately, that county council about expert witness fees. Is that still going to come before us, and trial expenses? Because it looks like on page 4. So this is through the budget process, but individual cases, this is page 4, Mike, that are we able still to hear about litigation expenses?
So yes, if we're talking about outside counsel, that's not part of the exemptions here. But when we're talking about expert witness fees for trials, arbitrations, or other litigation, that could be incurred by the court. The items on page 4 are actually listed. These are blanket exemptions already approved by the Board of Control. So this section, it may make sense, honestly, to combine it with the section referenced on page 16, but these are items that the Board of Control for several years now has granted blanket exemptions for because they were so numerous and so routine.
Correct.
That they just decided to grant a blanket exemption. This is simply codifying the existing practice.
Okay. But outside counsel?
Yeah, outside counsel, if the county were to, instance, want to hire outside counsel to represent us in litigation or on a real estate matter, for instance, that would still go through the normal legal process.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, next section.
The next section is on page 2 of the table relating to aggregation of contract amendments. And this is one area where I do want to make a correction to a statement made at the last meeting. At that meeting, I said that the contracts awarded from the same requisition would be treated as separate contracts for determining monetary thresholds. That is true.
This is under the administration
Under the
proposal.
administration's proposal, and you'll see that section is highlighted. That is true, but it only applies to amendments to those types of contracts. So if, for instance, the county were to do an RFP for a particular service and decided to award 2 contracts on that RFP, those 2 contracts would still be aggregated for the purposes of approving the approval thresholds. But once that initial approval happens, if the administration wanted to amend one of those contracts, then that dollar amount wouldn't carry over to both contracts. It would be treated as a separate transaction. And that is basically the administration's proposal, is to say that for amendments, we are deaggregating the amendments as separate transactions rather than combining them all into a single contract. But for individual requisitions initially, they will be aggregated for the purposes of approval. So if you had an RFP that went out for a service that costs $800,000 and you awarded it to 2 providers for $400 each, then those two providers would be combined and it would come to council for approval because it would be over the monetary threshold that would trigger council approval.
So, to Michael, am I correct that what we're proposing that's going to be different is that if a contract is going to be amended, if the contract amendment is over the threshold, whatever the threshold ends up being, it comes to council, and if it's under the threshold, it goes to the Board of Control, as opposed to it making a difference as to what the size of the original contract was.
That's correct, yeah. Under the administration's proposal and the proposed substitute, amendments will be considered purely on their own terms. So it would deal with the dollar amount being added by that particular amendment.
Okay. Any comments? Seeing none, go ahead.
So the next item relates to pulling items from the Board of Control to council. And I have a couple additional corrections here, clarifications. As noted at the last committee in the first column here, the council, or there's a function by which items that receive no approval from members of council serving on the Board of Control, no affirmative votes from those members would automatically come to council. I said at the last meeting, that only applies to change orders and amendments. We'll get back to that in a second. But the other thing I noted was that the administration's proposal would remove the county executive's ability to refer items to council. I believe that was true in one of the early drafts of this legislation that was shared with us, but it wasn't true of the current pending legislation. So the current legislation does retain the county executive's ability to refer items to council. But as it relates to the proposed substitute, it does a few things here. First, it amends the process for referring items to council that receive no affirmative votes from council members serving on the Board of Control. It would amend it so that it wouldn't only apply to change orders and amendments. It would now apply to all approvals of any kind, new transactions, new contracts, as well as change orders or amendments. Additionally, it would clarify and codify what I believe has basically been existing practice, which is it would give the council, it would retain the council president's authority to request an item be pulled to council for approval, but it would also provide that the council president could pull that item for discussion in a council committee and then referred back to the Board of Control. If, for instance, there was something that was time sensitive and couldn't go through the full 3 readings, and that committee hearing basically answered to the satisfaction of council the questions that were raised.
That reflects current practice that's currently frequently done but not reflected in the language. And the item about referring items receiving no votes from a council member, it's stronger than current language on council authority, in that it applies that provision to any item before the Board of Control as opposed to just amendments or change orders. Ms. Simon.
Can I ask a question about the practical history on this? Have there been times that council members on the Board of Control what's a circumstance that we would see this happening?
I have to say, my understanding is it's very rare. I don't know that it's ever happened, because typically if there are significant questions raised by the council members on Board of Control, it'll either be held at the Board of Control or the council president typically pulls it.
So if they vote no, one votes no, all vote no, it comes to us?
If all vote no.
All.
Or if there's an absent
Abstention?
member.
Are they
Basically,
allowed?
It basically just requires that any item on the Board of Control agenda needs at least one yes vote from a council member to be approved at the Board of Control.
So one affirmative vote just totally overrides any other no votes in this, if
We'd
there's
still
an
need
abstention?
Yeah, it would
You
still need a
need
majority of the board, but
Right,
yes, yeah.
right, okay.
So, as a matter of practice, if one member of the Board of Control wants something sent to council, the council president is almost always going to agree. This is going to come into play if the council president is out of touch with his or her council members, which hopefully isn't going to happen, but it should be in here as a protection. Any comments or questions? Next item.
The next item on the list is termination of contracts, and this one basically would allow, under the administration's proposal, the county to terminate contracts for material breach either for cause or for convenience. And the proposed substitute basically accepts the administration's proposed language on this. There are circumstances, I think, where it would make sense to terminate either for cause or for convenience, depending on the context. It is true, I think, with respect to our contractual options, if we have a termination for convenience clause in a contract, we always can terminate for convenience. That's the point of termination for convenience. So it is not necessarily definitive one way or the other, but that's the substance of the proposed substitute here.
So if you terminate for cause, there's a substantial process that this triggers. And sometimes it will be to the county's advantage to terminate for convenience instead of for cause and not go through that extended process. But there was also, for example, with the Harris contract, where the vendor didn't perform and the administration terminated the contract for convenience. And then we wanted to go back and recover money from them for some of what they didn't perform. And we did end up getting something back, but our position would have been stronger if we would have gone through the process and terminated for cause rather than convenience. So it's probably a good thing for the administration to have both options, but they have to be careful in which they exercise.
Yeah, Mr. President, I was going to bring up the Harris contract. I'm not sure that the decision to terminate for convenience had anything to do with us as a council. In fact, I think if council was brought in sooner, maybe we would have been able to weigh in on the wisdom of terminating that contract, not for cause, but for convenience.
Didn't have anything to do with us.
Correct.
You're correct about that.
So that's right.
You're totally
And that was
right.
colossally, I'm not going to have any editorial here, but I think the more this council can bring forth people in a room about breaches of contract, material problems with contracts, I think that's better. And so my preference is not to abdicate these decisions entirely to the administration. I want to be involved as a council member, as a body, to discuss and weigh in on what we're doing with major county contracts of this magnitude, such as the Harris contract.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, that makes sense. Anything else?
I agree with the point, but it was also the administration's call whether they bring us in or not. And if they're going to do cause, they do cause, but it's about them. If I can, Mr. President, I'll just weigh in on the previous one. I just didn't comment. The 3 bullet points from the previous one, I support this proposed change. The first is just language. The president and the executive can both pull an item, but because the county executive chairs the committee, they just use the word refer for him, whereas a council member or council president requests. And I like the strengthening language of the amendment or change order. So I support that amendment.
Okay, thank you. So the council should be more involved in problematic contracts, but I don't think that means that there's a problem with this proposed language. They should have the option to terminate for cause or convenience. Does anyone disagree with that? No. Okay. Next item.
The next item deals with unlawful interest in a public contract. As we discussed last time, current law deems any contract entered into in violation of revised code criminal statutes relating to an individual, elected official or employee having an unlawful interest, personal interest in a public contract awarded by the county is void and unenforceable. The administration's proposal would be that it would be void and unenforceable only at the discretion of the county, likely because there are probably situations where it may be beneficial for the county to remain in those types of contracts. But in further discussion with the administration, they've agreed essentially to withdraw this proposal because of the lack of clarity around the legal status with respect to what's in the revised code, which also declares these types of contracts void and unenforceable. So the proposed substitute would revert to current law.
So the substitute currently keeps things the way they are on this item, and so it's no change. Okay. And on the one item on the procurement database,
Yeah, so on page 3, as you'll recall, these are what I would consider more of the housekeeping items, either codifying current practice or making some technical corrections or changes to our procurement code. I'm going to gloss over all of them until the last item, which deals with the procurement database. As you recall, currently the code requires the administration to maintain 2 separate databases, one for real estate transactions and one for non-real estate transactions over $1,000. The administration has developed a database. It is publicly available. It does not divide those 2 types of transactions into separate databases. So what this proposed substitute would do is say, the administration is more than welcome to keep their existing database. I know they've put a lot of time and effort into building it out, but would require that the database be filterable or searchable so that a user could distinguish between real estate transactions and non-real estate transactions.
okay, any comment? Okay, so it looks like we're in pretty good shape, except for the first 2 items, the items on the approval thresholds and the real estate approval thresholds needs more consideration and discussion. I would like to make a motion that we accept this substitute. So this will become our working draft, but that I'm then gonna ask that we continue to hold this in committee, and we will do further work, and accepting the substitute doesn't mean that any of the items couldn't be further amended, but the preliminary indication is that the first 2 items need more consideration, and we're pretty close on the rest of it. So I have a motion. Is there a second? Any discussion on accepting the substitute? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it. The substitute has been agreed to. We're gonna hold this item for consideration, and we're gonna move on to our next item on the agenda, which is executive session. All meetings of the Cuyahoga County Council are open to the public under Ohio open meetings laws. Under that law, council may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During executive session, council confers outside the hearing of the public. Council may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All decisions are made in public. This afternoon, council will go into executive session for the purposes of discussing a collective bargaining matter, purchase or sale of property, and pending or imminent court action. During this time, our live stream will be down, and we ask those not specifically needed for the executive session to remain in council chambers. Council members will convene in the adjacent committee room A and will re-enter the meeting once the executive session has ended. Is there a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of discussing a collective bargaining matter, purchase or sale of property, and pending or imminent court action?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, and it requires a roll call, so I would ask the clerk to please call the roll on going into executive session.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Castleberry?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher? Mr. Schlepper,
Yes.
Ms. Conwell, Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Turner,
Yes.
Mr. Hauser, Ms. Simon,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Council President Miller.
Yes,
The motion carries.
thank you very much. We will now move into executive session.
Katie?
No, I do not believe we do.
The executive session has been completed. We're back in session for the committee of the whole. Does anybody have any miscellaneous business? Hearing none, the committee of the whole stands adjourned, and we'll bring the regular council meeting to order at 5 o'clock.